Alright, Sherman Hill, let's get into it. Where do we start? You can start by listening to me. Cheers. The Laramie Mountains are basically a big hunk of granite that formed between 900 and 600 million years ago, and which has been pushed out through the Earth's surface by tectonic forces. They're basically a sibling to the Front Range opposite Denver, but unlike the Front Range, where the railroad heading west needs to weave its way up through multiple curves and through multiple tunnels, the line moving west from Cheyenne has the advantage of a geological oddity that we know today as the gangplank. That gangplank is basically an inclined extension to the Great Plains and provides an easy approach from the plains up to the plateau of the Laramie Mountains. First in, best dressed for the Union Pacific. Alright, back to me. It's easy to forget when we look at the modern Union Pacific that we see today that back in the 1860s, on its drive west to complete that first transcontinental railroad, it was a shoestring frontier affair. This photo is one of many that shows the nature of the railroad and, for instance, the lack of uniform ties, or sleepers to use the King's English, and the almost complete absence of ballast. The Union Pacific, like literally every other road in America at that time, relied almost exclusively on the good old 8-wheeled American standard locomotive, a type that was exceedingly well suited to the roughly laid pioneer Union Pacific. When we look at the modern Union Pacific network, it's easy to lose the fine detail of Sherman Hill. Up closer, it's two red lines between two pin drops, but a bit closer still and we can see it is an original line of railway from 1867 and 1868 with improvements upon improvements upon improvements upon improvements. And each improvement took the line over Sherman Hill further and further away from that original pioneering roughshod shoestring railway. When we leave Cheyenne heading east, we can see that the line heads fairly directly up the gangplank, and the terrain setting on the map also shows us the change in landform as the line conforms at this stage fairly closely to the topography rather than trying to bend the topography to the surveyor's will. It's only up on the central part around Sherman that we see civil engineering features such as the Dale Creek Trestle, or viaduct to use the King's English, this being a photograph of the steel replacement for the original wooden structure that I showed you in some earlier photographs. By this stage, motive power had moved on from the 440, and we have a fairly routine example of a 280 Wadu type and an unusual 440 Camelback with its oversized wooden firebox that the Union Pacific dabbled with in order to burn waste coal. There's also this cutting that I showed you earlier, and its steep sides suggest that it's through granite material. It most certainly would have been a more exacting line of railway to build compared with building the line up the gangplank, for instance. There's another feature worth remarking upon, although it did not form part of the original construction, and that is the Ames Monument, which when built sat adjacent to Sherman, but today sits some distance from the current line of railway. So that's the line as originally built. At this stage, the line constructed in 1868 is heading southwest, but you can see an abrupt change of direction to the northwest, and then an easing to north as the line descends pretty directly into Laramie, past the winery, before arriving into town next to the steakhouse, which on reflection may not have been built yet. So that's the line as originally built in 1867 and 1868. The first change came to it with the acquisition in the 1880s of the railroad from Kansas and Denver up to Cheyenne. The map shows the original alignment of the line from Denver to Cheyenne and a rudimentary junction with the Union Pacific. That junction wasn't particularly an issue in the 1880s, but it would produce traffic problems in subsequent decades. The first step in solving the problem happened in the first decade of the 20th century, but before then we need to cross to the Laramie side of the hill and have a look at the construction of what was then called the New Line. It's a pretty simple affair. Instead of heading south on the 1868 alignment past the steakhouse, the line bears towards the foothills and buys greater distance to achieve the same altitude, thus creating a line with a less steep gradient for eastbound trains. It came at the price of significant earthworks, as we can see in this photograph. Check out the cutting in the background and check out the fact that this fine-looking locomotive and train is on a high and long embankment. Up on the central section, the original 1867-1868 line was abandoned and replaced by a new double track section. And those hard-won pieces of civil engineering sit today simply as scars in the landscape. The exception to the double tracking across the hill was the original Hermosa Tunnel, which remained as single track until the second Hermosa Tunnel was opened parallel to it in 1918. While the Dale Creek Viaduct may have disappeared, the creek itself remained, and it and other deep watercourses running off of Sherman Hill presented problems to the new alignment that were met by the construction of massive embankments such as this one. The net result of those embankments, that tunnel, and a series of cuttings such as this one through markedly softer material than that which had been encountered on the abandoned section of line, meant that the summit across Sherman Hill had been reduced by a couple of 100 feet, and that the Union Pacific Railroad had a double track connection across its highest point. You'll remember the former Denver Pacific line coming in from south of Cheyenne. Its junction got cleaned up with a realignment in 1908 that also included a cut-off to allow Denver traffic to go directly to and from the west without going through Cheyenne. That cut-off lasted to 1953, when it was modified as part of the construction of the significant Harriman line that took the lessons from that new line back in 1901 and expanded them to the nth degree, thanks to the much improved ability to shift dirt from one place to another. And all of those sweeping curves and high embankments and deep cuttings resulted in a new line of railway that was significantly longer than the 1901 line up from Cheyenne. It's that line of railway that also features in the magazine article I referenced in the introduction. But if you took two identical locomotives, lined them up in the Cheyenne yard, hooked up identical heavy trains behind them, and sent them on a race to Laramie, the train that had the Harriman deviation would win hands down, because the greater distance was significantly compensated by the lesser gradients. The only other significant change to occur was on that 1901 climb away from Laramie, where in these photographs taken in 1970, it's still single track, but the new line was progressively doubled during that decade. So today we have double tracks that follow the 1901 alignment up the new line across the plateau where our subject photograph was taken, and down to Cheyenne. On the Cheyenne side, it's supported by the single track Harriman Cutoff, which is used by heavy westbound trains, and on the Laramie side, the double track is supported by the single line that follows the 1868 original alignment, which is used almost exclusively for westbound downhill traffic. Okay, so in the next episode we'll start looking at the locomotives that feature in that classic photograph. We'll start with the 210-2 TTT class. Check on back, like, subscribe, enjoy. Cheers.